America's deep state is interfering in Indian politics. That's the accusation being made against United States government agencies like USAID by India's ruling party. At the center of this whole controversy is a $21 million grant given for boosting voter turnout in India by the US government. The details of this grant are still unclear. Who was the money spent to? How was it spent? And was it even spent at all? But a major controversy has now broken out, with the BJP even accusing the United States deep state of engaging in regime change in India. But the real story seems a bit more complicated than that. On this episode of Threadbare, we take a look at this controversy. Is America really trying to interfere in Indian politics? And what exactly can India do about it? So let's start with the basics. Earlier this week, Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency put out a tweet. This tweet said that United States government funding was being cut for hundreds of millions of dollars worth of US government programs. But what caught everyone's eye was a $486 million grant made for funding the Consortium for Elections and Political Process Strengthening. Included in that grant was $21 million for the purposes of boosting voter turnout in India. Now, this has instantly sparked a controversy in India. Spokespersons of India's ruling Bharatiya Janata Party questioned why US government money was being used to boost turnout in India. It was labelled a case of clear external interference in Indian politics. They also suggested that the money was being used to benefit India's opposition. Now, it's worth looking at this issue in detail to figure out whether America is really trying to interfere in Indian politics. The group, which reportedly received $21 million from the US government, is known as the Consortium for Elections and Political Process Strengthening. That's a fairly large name, but this consortium also includes groups like the National Democratic Institute, the International Republican Institute, and the International Foundation for Electoral Systems. Each of these are think tanks that are focused on pretty much the same mission. They work in countries around the world to promote American values by strengthening democratic systems, helping foreign countries conduct elections, and so on and so forth. This means that they work with political parties, election commissions, and civil society groups all over the world. Now, each of these three think tanks works extremely closely with the US government, and it is fair to say that they are an instrument of American foreign policy abroad. This Consortium for Elections and Political Process Strengthening, in particular, works extremely closely with America's USAID. Now, USAID, as you may have heard, is America's premier international aid agency. Last year, it gave roughly $40 billion in humanitarian aid around the world. USAID was first set up in 1961 during the Cold War, when America was competing with the Soviet Union for influence. Its job was to promote economic development in foreign nations. But USAID also had the strategic purpose of pushing American interests and values, like democracy. USAID has also been active in India for decades. Since 2001, it has spent roughly $3 billion on projects in India, with this massive amount of money being spent across Congress and BJP-led governments. $650 million of that funding has come over just the last 4 years, reports Money Control. Now, there are reasonable reasons why people are suspicious about USAID working in India. Indian critics of USAID point to its funding for Freedom House, which is a think tank that has criticized the state of Indian democracy. They also argue that USAID has funded non-profit organizations that have accused Indian industrialists like Gautam Adani of corruption. They also say that this is evidence of USAID's desire to discredit India's ruling government with US government funds. Backing up their arguments is USAID's history. During the 1960s and 1970s, USAID was working closely with America's Central Intelligence Agency to advance US interests. In fact, USAID had trained police and military personnel all over the world. This was especially true in undemocratic states used to repress people. This was a significant controversy that damaged USAID's reputation, and it continues to haunt the agency to this day. More recently, USAID was linked to efforts to destabilize the Castro regime in Cuba. Nations like Russia and Kenya have also complained about USAID activities and political interference in their countries. So it's true that USAID has a pretty complicated history. And India also has a very unpleasant memory of US government agencies funding domestic organizations. Critics of USAID argue that America has used covert means in the past to push its influence among think tanks and non-profit organizations. The Rampart scandal of 1967 was actually the first big example of this. In that case, it was discovered that the Central Intelligence Agency was funding non-profit organizations and think tanks to secretly push America's agenda in India. This scandal kicked off decades of fear and paranoia in India that US government agencies were meddling in Indian politics. And that's a pretty big part of what we're seeing today with this latest USAID controversy. But here's the thing, There are also some important questions that we need to ask about this latest controversy. First, it's unclear who received the $21 million from the United States government in the first place, and whether this money was actually spent. Remember that we're talking about the Consortium for Elections and Political Process Strengthening. Again, a very long name. But protests say that the consortium does not have a presence in India, and the think tanks that are a part of this consortium don't have any offices or activities in India over the last few years. That could be because India is very careful about having foreign agencies with US government support getting involved in domestic politics. Targeting USAID also raises another awkward question. If USAID is really interested in regime change in India, why have successive Indian governments accepted over $2 billion in funding from it over the last 20 years? In particular, USAID has provided India record amounts of funding over just the last 4 years, with projects supporting the government in poverty alleviation, sanitation projects, and water projects. USAID has also worked closely with India's foreign ministry. In fact, USAID is India's key partner on bilateral projects that are implemented in third countries around the world. These agreements were just signed in the last couple of years. USAID Chief Samantha Power also met Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar in 2022. And USAID hasn't always just criticized India. It also praised New Delhi for its role in handling the economic crisis in Sri Lanka. All of this means that we need more information about this latest voter turnout controversy. Why did the US government provide this money? Whom did it go to? How was it spent? And what does that mean for India-US relations? To be clear, US aid is absolutely pushing for American interests in India and abroad. It is not a charity. And it also has a very complicated history, which explains why Indians are so suspicious about these latest allegations. But India's government has also been happy to work with USAID despite all these concerns, which makes this a deeper controversy which needs to be looked into. Thanks for watching Threadbare with me, Shashank Mattu. You can catch this show again next week on India Today Global.